Consider the year 2050, when humankind has made great strides toward decarbonization. That's mostly because solar and wind energy prices, which were already plummeting in 2022, are declining. But rather than simply intensifying its efforts to produce plastics from oil and gas, the fossil fuel industry has tripled its output from 2016 levels, as the World Economic Forum had forewarned would happen. Humans will be producing trillions of pounds of plastic annually by 2050, which will result in emissions of greenhouse gases equal to almost 600 coal-fired power plants. In 30 years, we won't be burning as much gas and oil for fuel, but we will be using a lot more of them to make plastic. With the much-hyped idea of bio-based plastics, people are attempting to prevent that terrible situation from happening here in 2022. Traditional plastics are composed of carbon chains that come from fossil fuels. Instead, bioplastics employ carbon that is taken from plants like corn or sugarcane and combined with other compounds, such as plasticizers, to create the plastic. If the bioplastic is utilized for something long-lasting, like building materials rather than single-use items like cups and bags, like when those plants are grown, carbon is removed from the atmosphere and locked inside the plastic. However, bio-based plastics are actually an issue for a number of reasons. To grow enough plants to replace conventional plastics would require an astonishing amount of land and water, in addition to the energy required to make and transport it all. Bioplastics can contain the same harmful ingredients that go into making plastic, and they still have the potential to splinter into microscopic pieces that pollute the land, water, and air. When scientists and environmentalists agree that the only way to stop the crisis is to just stop producing so much damn plastic, regardless of its source of carbon, switching to bioplastics could provide the industry with a justification to keep producing exponentially more plastic under the guise of eco-friendliness. What would a significant switch to bioplastics entail for future emissions? A recent study published in the journal Nature sought to evaluate this and discovered that, under certain hypothetical conditions, bioplastics might become carbon negative. The simulation went much further than those prior projections regarding production through 2050 by considering 4 possible scenarios for how plastics manufacturing, and the life cycle of those products, might develop through the year 2100. A baseline scenario is the first one, in which things proceed as usual. The second increases a tax on carbon dioxide emissions, making it more expensive to manufacture plastics derived from fossil fuels, promoting the switch to bio-based plastics, and lowering emissions through the end of the century. It would also encourage producing plastic with more sustainable energy. The third assumes that plastics will eventually become more easily recyclable or reusable, which will lower demand and emissions. The last scenario envisions a circular bioeconomy with significantly less plastic. The study's lead author, Paul Stegman, at the Netherlands Organization for Applied Scientific Research, in collaboration with PBL Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency, says that in this case, we should combine all of these strategies. In this other future, people would still need to farm a lot of crops in order to make bioplastics, but they would use and reuse those plastics frequently. To be clear, this is a hypothetical situation rather than a forecast about the future of the plastic sector. It would need to come together perfectly in many ways for it to work. One example is that a fully circular plastics sector will be impossible as long as plastic consumption keeps expanding, wrote Stegman and his co-workers in their report. According to Stephen Feit, senior attorney at the Center for International Environmental Law, plastics businesses will be happy to accommodate that demand by increasing production. The wider fossil fuel sector has been planning to switch to petrochemicals for years, he claims. It is known that plastics and nitrogen fertilizers are the 2 main components of petrochemicals, which serve as the catalyst for the expansion of fossil fuels. Furthermore, there is no incentive to keep the material in circulation as long as the plastics sector continues to produce exponentially more of it. Because it is so inexpensive to produce, recycling in its current form just does not work. One of the many reasons experts are urging treaty negotiators to include a production cap is that it would drive up the cost and demand for recycled plastic. Plastic can only be recycled once or twice before it starts to degrade too much, which is another issue. Due to the increasing difficulty of recycling some products, such as multi-layered pouches, wealthier nations have begun sending them all to developing nations. That's as far away from a circular economy as you can go. The area required to cultivate the feedstock crops is another problem. According to Janis Brizga, an environmental economist at the University of Latvia, it will compound the already enormous strain on land use, and we are simply displacing all the other species, which is one of the key causes of biodiversity loss. Brisger calculated the amount of area needed to grow sufficient plants for bioplastics to replace all of the conventional plastics used in packaging in a paper that was released in 2020. The answer, at the very least, an area larger than France, requiring 60% more freshwater yearly withdrawal than the European Union. And to maintain the health of the plants, a ton of chemicals would be required. According to Brisger, many of these crops are grown in intensive agricultural systems that employ significant amounts of pesticides, herbicides, and synthetic chemicals. Most of them rely heavily on fossil fuels as well. And from the standpoint of human health, we don't even want to have plastics in our immediate environment. There is mounting evidence connecting their constituent compounds to health issues. In one study, phthalates, a chemical used commonly in plastics, may have been connected to 100,000 premature deaths annually in the US. Because we are completely surrounded by plastic products, including clothing, carpeting, containers, and cars, to name a few, microplastics are appearing in people's blood, breast milk, feces, and bodies. Additionally, it is unclear what kind of impact the production of microplastics will have on the climate. Early studies on microplastics indicate that as they degrade in the environment, they produce a sizable amount of methane, a strong greenhouse gas. Nobody is certain that a cyclical bioplastics economy, which converts plastics into durable building materials or dumps anything that can't be used again, will be successful in keeping carbon and methane locked up. But all is not lost yet, and if we act now, we can prevent further damage to ourselves and the Earth before it is too late. If you have any more suggestions that could help, leave it in the comments section below. And if you enjoy educational content like this, consider subscribing and watching another video just like this one.